Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to an episode of CA Ultra. It's been a while since I've gotten to say that. Obviously, it's been the off season, so we've been taking a little bit easy in the Call of Duty content, but excited to be back. With me is Chris, and we were actually joined by some special guests today. If you guys haven't noticed them, we were on their show earlier. This is the Hipfire Podcast, so I'm going to give this to you guys for a quick little introduction. Why don't you tell the people who you are and what you do?
All right, so with the Hipfire Podcast, we cover all things competitive Call of Duty, from the challenger scene to the pro scene as well. Basically, we decided one day we play games almost every night, and we talk about COD almost every night. So might as well start a podcast. And we've grown quite well the past couple months, and we're enjoying it. So
yeah, sort of along the lines of what Seth said, we've been covering or watching Call of Duty for a couple of years now, and decided to make some content around it. And lately, we've been getting into the challenger scene, which has been really interesting, and we've enjoyed it ever since.
Yeah, you guys got events with that podcast after you guys lose a couple games in COD. I feel like that's why we started CA Overwatch, is because Spencer got tired of smashing his desk because Fisk started.
Yeah, after Toronto Defiant, the Overwatch team, after their season 1, I was like, I can't just keep screaming into the void. You know what I mean? So I got to be able to put my opinions out there. But yeah, no, you guys are.
Before we start, though, if you guys like our comment, please like and subscribe. It really helps the YouTube algorithm in getting our video out on other people's homepages to other Torontonians that are into COD but haven't heard anything yet. So,
yeah, and if you're interested in Hipfire, we'll put your guys' links in the description below, so make sure to check it out there. Again, all that socials and all that fun stuff will be down below. But again, I like the fact that you guys brought up your sort of dedication recently to the challenger side, because I totally agree. That was, obviously I knew who you guys were beforehand. We've been mutuals for a while. We were on your show before the Challengers Cup really started to talk about the Ultra and what they've done in the offseason. But I think that you guys have really taken this really cool approach where, you put a lot of work into the Challengers side, which is something I love to see. I love to see the Tier 2 scene grow and all sorts of different types of esports. I think it's incredibly important to funnel that talent in. And that sort of leads into some of our, first questions today. And that was really your thoughts on these Challengers Cups, how they've went, which teams have really impressed you, and maybe some of the players that have really stood out as well.
Yeah, I can go first. So I think the way the Challenger Cups have gone, for the most part, I think they've been very well produced. Obviously, for some odd reason, the CDL has not necessarily been involved with streaming a lot of the cups, which is unfortunate. But thanks to iHoldShift, he's taken it upon himself with his own team to be able to broadcast most of them and bring us this content. And the format has allowed for some very entertaining matchups in all three regions. I think teams that stood out, obviously, many people will know about Wester, given that they've won the past 4 Challenge Cups in NA, and they've really taken the scene to storm in that sense. Because at least in the NA scene, we've never seen anyone dominate the amateur scene quite like they have. Obviously, being the lineup of Paul, Zap, Zedman, and Gravity. Mm-hmm. In EU, I think many people, and I'm sure you guys have mentioned, Afro has been a guy that been very high on the EU scene, and his team House Tarth has taken now with this past weekend 2 of the cups in the EU Challenger scene. The first team to do that, that team being House Tarth alongside Gizmo, Defrag, and Weeman, who ended up being their new 4th, and they've been a real big force as well. And I've taken Storm and Afro. I think one of the nice things about him and why he stands out amongst all those players and challengers, from my point of view, is his ability to do it both. He was a flex last year. He did it with the AR most of the time, and this year he's really been a 47U player and an aggressive SMG. And his numbers, I've been tracking their stats from the grand finals, and his numbers 1.39, 1.4s. He's consistently ahead of the leaderboard, and it shows why he's such a big talent. But that's just my draws or initial takeaways from the challenger scene thus far.
Yeah, so for me, I've been watching challengers, or the amateur scene, for the past 3-4 years. Mm-hmm. And I've watched it steadily progress and get better and better. And part of that is because former pros are dropping into the amateur scene now and teaching the young guys how to play properly. Another part is seems to be more of an incentive to play in the amateur scene, because you can get picked up on a pro team and get a minimum 50K salary. It's a big deal for a lot of these guys, right? So there's a lot of passion and a lot of talent, and now it's being matched with some leadership and experience as well. And what I've noticed in the amateur scene lately is there's a lot of really good competitive teams. Before in the amateur scene, there's always really good players, really individual skill players, and you could tell who they were. But I feel like now we're also seeing like actual teams being formed that stick together and look good as a 4-man roster, which I think is a little bit new for the amateur scene. And it's like Wester is one of those teams, and in Spain, like the Rams are one of those teams where they just play full Spanish roster and they play really well together. And we're starting to see that more now. And yeah, it's good. It's good to see that like they're taking it seriously. They're scrimming almost every day. They have a lot of the teams have coaches now in the amateur scene, so it's being taken more seriously. And it's a good thing for CDL teams to start looking for academy teams and like academy rosters, because you can build them up like proper teams and have a really good scrim partner, like whenever you want, right? You can have like really good opportunities to see like a proper team play. I don't know. To me, that's what stands out this year for me.
Yeah, and I think you brought up some good points. I think it's another really interesting that it's not coincidental that you've seen such an influx of talent, especially in like the NA Challenger side as well as the EU, after a year that went from 5v5 to 4v4 with no expansion, right? Because you're right, that's like a minimum of like one player per team sort of cut, and some of them moved into the Challenger scene. Plus, you've seen some replacements come in already. So that's just like, again, there's so much talent, there's so much leadership in that system that you've really seen some teams pop off. And I think it's just another sign of like what the franchise era does, and the ability for, new talent to sort of come up. And the longer a game like Call of Duty stays on top, the more and more young talent is going to start to prove themselves, right? Some of these kids have been playing Call of Duty since they were 10, 9, 8 years old. And they're finally reaching that age of like 18, right? Where they're starting to sort of hit some of their peaks. So I think you're just going to see it and continue to improve more and more and more. And to go back to your point, how you brought up about, Afro sort of really standing out on the EU side, I totally agree. He was I was, praying to the Canadian gods that we might see him on the Toronto Ultra. Although obviously that doesn't seem to be the case. I'm happy to see him get finally picked up, though. The success was well earned. He was one of those, 4 or 5 players I really had on my radar coming into the year. We talked about that, on your guys' show. We brought it up, talked about it when we were talking about potential people who Ultra could pick up, back in like August when it first ended, right before we even got to see how good he was on Cold War. So I've been a big fan of his for a while, so it's really nice to see sort of his success. I think the team that really caught me off guard, though, was Westar. Like a lot of these people who were really showing up in the EU, I kind of knew they were good. Like Afro, I knew he'd be good. I'm not like necessarily surprised. Nasty, we already knew he was a talent from Modern Warfare, right? But when it came to NA, I had like the Fire, Sib and Jimbo, Standy. I'm a big Standy fan, but I'll be completely honest. I totally slept on Venom and Gravity and Paul. If we had that conversation, I didn't mention either of those 4, and those guys have came in there and just absolutely, I mean, it's no secret now, like they have like sort of, shocked the world, right? Taken the Call of Duty world by storm, especially in the amateur scene, because I personally did not have that 4 being that elite, especially with some of the 4s that we've seen so far. Even like the built by game was like Goddard X and them, right? Like I looked at that squad, I was like, this squad is gonna win at least one of the 4, and for them not to even, I mean, they obviously the most recent one they saw some success, but I think it was really the first time where they really hit that like top 3 sort of position. So that team has really, really impressed me, mostly because they kind of caught me off guard, and like I've just been so dominant.
Yeah, no, I think the interesting thing about Wester in particular, and I don't think you're necessarily alone in the fact that you didn't necessarily have them very high at the beginning of the season, because even their coach Phoenix keeps talking about how they were often seen as the leftovers towards the beginning of the Challenger scene or this season for Cold War. I think what's interesting to note about some of these guys is that they've had success individually. They've never played together as a team before this. Venom and Gravity, obviously we saw them on FaZe Academy last year, and they had middling success throughout the season. Paul obviously had success, I think, even teaming with Westar and guys like Hagi in the past, and similarly with Zaptius. But with this 4 together, it seems like they're the perfect blend of teamwork. And what you have seen in past COD seasons is that teams that pick up the meta very quickly and pick up teamwork very quickly tend to excel early on. And the nice thing about Western, unlike those teams in the past in Call of Duty that split apart later on during the season for better opportunities, because they're the only other opportunity for Western is the Call of Duty League, and that hasn't necessarily presented that opportunity to them yet. They say to them, might as well stick together and build upon what they've been doing, and as a result they've been so consistent and so much better than majority of the other teams they play in.
Yeah, no, it's been extremely impressive, because like you said, I just I really thought we'd see some other teams at the top. I was a big Triumph Gaming fan too when this thing started, and they've been Sorry, Chris, you go. I've been talking too much.
I'm gonna steal your spotlight, Spencer.
It's your spotlight.
Yeah, on just another general note too, I feel like the switch from going from 5 people on a roster to 4 people on a roster is really, really going to help once again mature the players in the Challenger Series. And I think the results, maybe not this season, from next season, is going to be a lot more volatility in the players' rosters. We saw a heck of a lot of volatility because people had to drop at least one person on the starting, but we're going to have another year where people not only have that raw skill, but they're going to have raw skill that has been cultivated and combed by people who used to be in Call of Duty. So I think we're going to see a real, I know why are we even talking about 2022, but I think we're going to see a really, really big class of incoming talented individuals, even when that's coming up.
Well, there's a couple things that I just want to build upon that, because one, I think with expansion, like there is a reason to talk about 2022, right? Because if you're Westar, like, I'm trying to think, this is probably not a great point, so I won't go too much into it, but like if you had a couple, like let's say a few teams came at them, right, and we're like, oh, we want to offer Venom a spot, we want to offer Pollux a spot, we want to offer Gravity a spot, you can only have 2 individuals on a CDL roster on one team. Like if you're Westar, do you not seriously maybe consider, like that's what I'm saying, you probably just take the money and take the opportunity, but at the very least, would you not like at least consider the possibility that, hey, is it not maybe smarter to just try to find an organization to put some money up front for this upcoming season and then maybe really bet on yourselves to maybe get picked up as an entire organization going into the expansion era? Probably too big of a risk realistically. Like, my Venom might just take the money and become a sub. But with the expansion most likely on the horizon, I at very least think it would be an idea that they would, talk amongst themselves, right? Because, if this is expanded upon next year, and there's rumors that could be some crazy amount of teams, but like realistically, maybe 4, I think is like a safe sort of number. It's so early on to make this assessment, but right now, those 4 are definitely at the top of a lot of people's list to sort of just be, picked up, right? You got them, Renegades, Team Heretics, like there's some other interesting names there, but they'd be on my list for sure.
No, I think the interesting thing with them, and I'm sure they've talked about being picked up this as a sub to various teams within the CDL. I think the interesting thing to note, given obviously with the pandemic and how everything's changed in terms of the landscape, one thing I found interesting was when I was talking to in his chat to Brian Saint, the coach of Minnesota, I was asking about during the scouting series, I was asking about like whether guys like him and other coaches were going to use this scouting series as an opportunity to pick up players as subs. And what he informed me is that majority of the teams aren't necessarily looking to do that. He said that most of the teams are looking to utilize their coach as a substitute and only necessarily pick up an amateur player when they see fit. And even just recently, Diamond Khan, who was picked up onto the subliners as a starter, or at least we expect him to be announced as so, when he was on their academy team, I don't believe, from my understanding, that any of them were substitute players. They were just a part of their academy team. So it seems like organizations are adverse. Besides Minnesota, he said Saint said Minnesota was the one team that was looking to pick up an actual sub, but that most teams are looking to be adverse to that, which I think is a mistake, because you're losing out on a lot of talent that you could procure later in the season. But that's just from what I was able to tell was the vibe.
I wasn't.
I was gonna say, what I'll add to that though is like you could also do what Florida did with Neptune, where the nice thing is if you wait to sign a sub, you could find someone that could be an instant replacement for somebody else in their team, and then bring him in. And if they don't perform well, you have your old starter as a sub to put in. So there could be the thing where teams are waiting to see which player needs to get dropped. Because like let's say you pick up a main AR as a sub, and if your main AR is stable the rest of the year, you're not really ever going to use them. Right, I almost think it's better to wait and see what holes you have on a team, and then go for a guy who's been playing well, like Zaptius, right? Like if you have problems at S&D, maybe you go after him or something like that. I don't know. That's just my take.
So I was gonna say sorry. Are you gonna go? Or are you gonna try to move on, Chris? Because I want to talk a little bit more about this.
I wanted to expand on that first.
Oh, you go for that.
I feel like that's a good point. That's also like a risk reward type of scenario that they have to weigh, right? They have 20 other teams that could be thinking the same thing. Or they could all be like, let's pick up this guy too, and then they're left with the scraps afterwards. So
Yeah.
we can definitely see that as well. Spencer, how good that team.
Oh no, yeah, I was gonna say I was also in Saints chat when he was talking about that, and that it didn't annoy me because I get it, like money's a thing, but at the same time I was like, man, there's so much talent. Like I feel like I don't understand how if you're a coach or an organization after Modern Warfare, and you saw the success that Awakening had and Mac had and Draws and Hollow had, and all of these sort of young shots that you write, these rookies kind of coming into the league, and you're not at least like trying to take a shot on one of them at least as a substitute. Right, like I understand that like a lot of these teams are pretty set with their rosters and they're probably pretty good rosters, but like man, at the very least, like you never know where your team's going to be, and if you find yourselves at like 10th, 11th, 12th position, right? I just feel like why not try to procure talent and develop them early on and have some sort of like academy team, like you said with New York, where you don't even have to pay like all 4 people on the team. You just have your one sort of substitute and then a team sort of built around them. Because I do think that the talent is worthwhile, and it's great to Chris's point too. Like, yeah, you can sit there and wait. But like we were telling Toronto, you know, hey, this Afro guy is really, really good. I'd love to see Toronto go after him. And they were probably thinking the same thing. Well, let's just sit back and wait. The problem is if you sit back and wait and then an amateur really establishes themselves, everybody's going to know that, right? Like back in August, less people were talking about Afro than they were in January, right? He was way more of a hotter commodity on like Twitter, especially after the scouting series. So now if you're a team like London, you're like, oh, and I know they knew who Afro was beforehand, but you know what I mean? That call becomes a lot easier. Whereas if you were Toronto and you maybe went after somebody like that in October, you probably could have got them. But that's the sort of the risk reward that you kind of play. But I would like to see a lot of teams pick up substitute player. I think it's smart. And I think Florida was actually one of the teams who wasn't they rumored to like be one that wanted their coach as a substitute? And then all of a sudden Neptune is signed as a substitute player, right? And he comes in. Yeah. So there it is, right? It's another example why.
No, just last point to touch on that, because you reminded me of something that happened last season, which I think should have been the gold standard and why you want to pick up a sub just for insurance cases. Is Seattle. Yeah, it's Seattle. Throughout, they had their roster fell apart in many ways last season. And as a guy that was a big fan of Damon Carmavarlo, seeing him have to retire on that roster was very upsetting. But the most annoying thing, and Karma outlined this throughout the season, was their inability to pick up a substitute player or a really strong sub that they needed to input to the lineup, because they had Proto and Pander, who were friends with their coach Nubsy, as their subs. They weren't really viable or suitable candidates to take the place of Karma or Enable, who they ended up dropping later on. Yeah. They should have, their inability to go after guys like Mac and Awakening is what hurt them throughout the season, and it was one of the reasons why they didn't even finish very well.
Yeah, no, I totally agree. I mean, just again, look at New York before they got Mac, and look at New York after they got Mac, right? Look at Florida before they got Awakening, and look at them. They won 3 titles in a row. These players can really make an impact. And again, you saw teams like New York pick up guys like Hydra. There's some really good amateur talent, and I don't think that you just scrap all the pros with all the experience. By no means am I suggesting that in any way, shape, or form. But if you're you have your pro team, like a team like Minnesota, why not go after a young amateur submachine gun specifically, not just a substitute, but a sub itself, right? Because clearly, I think that was one of the concerns some people had about that roster, is that on paper, maybe the roles didn't necessarily fit the way that a lot of people had sort of predetermined in their head. And obviously, I think I've heard good things about how they performed in scrims and whatnot. But I would feel way better about that team if they had Venom or Standy in the substitute role, just in case, right? Maybe it works out, and maybe you don't need it, and then you don't need it. Worst case, you're spending $50K for a good player to have on the bench and build an academy roster who your fans can root and build tier 2, right? Best case, unfortunately, if you do find yourself underperforming and you needed somebody in, you got one of the best amateur talents in the league already under your umbrella, who your fans are ideally somewhat, used to. So that's sort of my opinion, but
sort of your opinion. I don't know.
Definitely my opinion, but yeah.
Unless Seth wants to chime in, let's parlay this into a general conversation about academy teams. And I guess let's start down niche. I mean, we're a Toronto podcast, specifically. We like Toronto. Let's talk about Toronto's academy team. I'll be the first to admit I have no idea who Onyx, Tetsky, and Scrappy are. You guys seem to have a little bit more knowledge about them. Fill me in. These guys, are these guys Scuff? What's up?
So I'll just say these guys are S&D, bread and butter S&D kids, and they came up through that scene. And I'll start with Onyx, and then I'll throw to Yas. So Onyx is a guy who I've known for a very long time because he kind of came up with the Illy crowd. Mm-hmm. So he was playing with guys like Prolute, Illy, Selly, and all those guys playing S&D tournaments. And whoever's ever touched Illy's like gameplay and play with Illy seem to get better, and he seems to have a pretty good idea of who's very good.
Yeah.
So if Illy says someone's good, you might as well vouch for him. But beyond that, there was a period, I think it was the third cup, and is when they broke through with Mochilla, and they decided to leave open comms for S&D. Like the only academy team to do that from what I've seen. And I thought that was like super interesting and gutsy because, you know, people can copy their strats or whatever. But the best part about it is they didn't really have any set strats, and that's why they didn't mind like having comms open. And I say that like that's a good thing because the way Onyx read S&D against every opponent was really, really interesting. Like I don't know if the VOD's still up or not, but watching the VOD, he would before the round he would say, all right, let's hit this. They're gonna do this, and we're gonna do this to counteract it, right? And then mid-round, if something happened where he was wrong and like 3 guys hit something he didn't expect, he would make a call right away. Or if they were in a 2v1 or 2v2, he'd make a call, say, let's hit this bomb site, and he would have no hesitation. They would just do it. So when you have a guy like Onyx on your team who makes the calls and has players that trust him, it could definitely work out. And it was working. They won like a bunch of S&Ds. They kept winning game 5s. They had like all the ice in that tournament. And they went into Westar, and it was over from there because the respawn just wasn't competitive enough.
Yeah.
And it still really isn't competitive enough. But with Insight, right, as a leader, it can get there for sure. And for a guy like Scrappy, right, he hasn't really played Variant as much, so he'll get there as well. But yeah, just from an S&D standpoint, it makes a lot of sense to go for these guys as an academy team because scrimming S&D is never fun. It's just not. You got to give away your strats. You got to figure out what they're doing. Like it's not that much fun. But when you have an academy team that's super creative and makes really good calls, like this one does, I feel like it'll better your S&D. Like the more reps you get against them, the more you realize like, okay, this strat works for them. Let's try it for our team, right? Having a really good S&D academy team can go a long way. That's kind of my take. What do you think about that?
I never thought about. I have another take, but I'll bring it to Yasser first. But I actually never thought about just from the scrim perspective. I mean, this was some people thought about Ultra in the previous season, right? Was maybe they want the 10-person roster for that exact reason. Now I think most people kind of agree that necessarily wasn't the case. But with an academy team, it might be a little bit easier, right? There's a little bit less internal competition. So that's an interesting perspective. Sorry, let's hear your opinion now. But I like that take.
Yeah, no, I think Seth's hit the point there, the ability to scrim with these academy teams, because we've already seen New York scrimming with their academy team even just as yesterday when they made their switch, and it provides them that flexibility, especially in S&D. But I think, like you guys, I was a bit caught off guard when we heard that this was going to be Toronto's academy team, just because we know these guys to a certain degree. They're not necessarily the names like guys like Westar, like guys like on New York Academy team, like Saints, or on LAG's Academy team like Chino. They don't have those same names. But I think what Toronto's done here, and it's kind of been their philosophy, even with their main roster, is that they're betting on players that are young and that their potential is super high. I think that's sort of what you see with this roster, is with guys like Onyx, like Seth mentioned, and Scrappy, who are like S&D stars that haven't necessarily, in Scrappy's case, haven't necessarily had a lot of time to compete. I mean, he just turned 18 towards the end of the Modern Warfare season, so he's only really had time to play Variant and in these Challengers Cups as of the start of this season. And I think one of the best things about this academy team is the fact that he gets to play with a guy like Insight, who can sort of, although he's an amateur in his own right, he has a lot of experience in the amateur scene. He can help guide these guys and mold them into the team that they were. Because you could see their placements in the first 2 cups. Onyx, Scrappy, and Teskey, they played with a guy named Hazy, who I'm not familiar with. They placed top 64. They switched that up for Moch, who Moch isn't necessarily the guy that slays out the most, but he's been around the block. He's won tournaments in his, or at least he's placed high in other tournaments. He's a veteran. He understands the game with high knowledge.
He's a coach.
He's coached before, so he was able to mold these guys into the team that they became the last 2 cups, where they were stealing S&Ds off multiple teams. They were frustrating the hell with multiple teams, with not only their host, as many people like to say, but the way that they played. They played, as Onyx would call, very ratty, playing off angles, places that people wouldn't expect, and that caught a lot of the top teams off guard. And I feel like his ability to mold the team Moch's ability to mold the team to the way they were is why they were so successful. And I think having Insight be able to do that will, get the best out of these guys. And, for the Ultra, if one of these guys ends up hitting and succeeding their potential, which I think Scrappy's a guy that I would look out for, I mean, it's money in the bank for you.
Yeah. I think it's interesting because So I really like the idea of building around like young talent with high upside. We're a big fan of that in both the Overwatch as well as the Call of Duty scene. And I totally agree that's what they kind of did last year, right? You saw guys like Cammy and Kleenex, maybe names that people didn't necessarily have on the top of their list. But again, young players, high upside, work out great for them. I also like the fact that you go for an S&D team first that maybe has less experience with Variant, because I think there's something to be said about it's easier to teach an S&D, a player who's more naturally S&D gifted, like Respawn, for instance, than maybe the other way around, teaching somebody Respawn S&D. And maybe that's incorrect, but at the very least, I think that it's a possibility. I think like you look at a guy like Afra, right? Great S&D background, and just his like instincts have translated really well into like Control and Respawn in itself. So I wonder if you take that same philosophy and apply it to these three players. They're just going to continue ideally get better and better and better, especially with their age. And then you're right, once they figure out the variant, having the ability to clutch up an S&D is extremely, extremely valuable. And you're right, you can steal game fives. That's, you know what I mean? Like that's a huge bonus to have on teams, especially in the CDL. And then this is my final point, and this probably is a poor take. This is my Overwatch showing, my Overwatch background. I'll preface this take.
Full of poor takes today.
No, I've had some okay ones, but this one especially, I'm just going to preface it by saying this is my my background from Overwatch, and I know Call of Duty teams don't do this, and I'm sure there's reasons why, but I'm just curious as to what your opinion is on it. But you're right, a lot of people don't like to give away S&D strategies, and I think there's definitely people who are better at Respawn versus better at S&D. In Overwatch, it's standard to sub players in and out, not only based on map, but based on like individual modes. If you're the Toronto Ultra, for instance, because Insight also has a really good S&D background, do you not maybe look at a situation where, again, if the team's struggling or whatever, instead of just completely making a roster change, let's say you bring Insight in for Methods or you bring Onyx in for whoever, would you not just consider the possibility that maybe you keep like Methods and Banson for Respawn, and then you'd bring like an Insight Onyx in maybe for like just for S&D? Now, would that mess up team chemistry too much? Is there reasons why no? Is that just like the COD culture? I'm curious to hear your guys' opinions on maybe why no team has ever really tried to do that, because I know in Overwatch has done quite a bit, but it seems to never happen in Call of Duty, which is interesting because I keep hearing about these S&D stars. I'm like, well, let them play S&D. Like, I didn't have to play Respawn. We have bans.
This is it. You go ahead.
Wait, I'll let Yasser go, and then I'll go. Okay.
I was just gonna say, this is something Seth and I've actually talked about it at length, because Seth and I've gone back like, oh, why don't like even last year, why didn't like Optic like at times, even though they were a strong S&D team, sub in their S&D sub Tupac or whatever it was, or why didn't they sub in certain players that are like geared to S&D? And from what I can gather, I think a lot of it does have to do with both the culture and the chemistry and how COD players view things. Having a player substitute mid-series, I think with how COD is treated, would only throw off the chemistry of the team. Now, I have no facts to support this. This is just purely from what we've seen. So I would be curious to see it. And it was something that was like people thought about when the franchising was first announced.
They did it with Enable, right? Enable did it with Pander.
He did do it for one event, and I don't think it worked out very well.
No, it did not work out.
Granted, that's not exactly. I mean, it was Seattle. It was Seattle.
Yeah.
It wasn't like you're not talking about like a team that has a lot of the potential. They had no potential in both Respawn and S&D. Like, it was not working either way. Yeah. But for like teams that do, like, for example, New York was, I think, a perfect example. Their team that was very strong in Respawn that didn't necessarily do very well in S&D that could have maybe benefited from this kind of strategy. But I think it has to do with the culture. Like, it doesn't, like, I can't see players volunteering themselves, hey, I'm going to step out this map, you can take my S&D spot, and I think that's a big part of it, but that's just from what we can gather.
Yeah, let me add a little color here and also push back on something Spencer said. So just that, I feel like the league is too young and too volatile in order to really test that out, because you need time to build chemistry, not only with a new set of players, but also, start to bring in other players, building more chemistry that way. It's you can't do that when you have like the turnover that the league has right now and the instability. So I don't know if we're gonna get a true answer on that in the time being. In terms of culture, that totally makes sense. I feel like the first team to like put their foot down and say, swallow the pill on the culture standpoint and just do it and figure it out is going to open up a floodgate. Like you said, if it works, if they do that, it's going to open up a floodgate.
Yeah, I think I agree with the volatility, and I'm not suggesting like, oh, this is what has to happen. Like you know what I mean? But I know, obviously, like no one does it. Like there's reasons why it doesn't happen. I'm not like, putting my foot down. I just sort of an idea that I've been like struggling with in my head as like, should teams like this try? Because again, like I like Methods, and Methods is a good AR. I think he's, gets underrated too many times throughout, a lot of people in this community. But I do think that one of his weakest modes would be the S&D, right? Like I really like him on respawn, but I do think his S&D can look a little shaky at points. We saw it throughout the year. And it's probably like insight strength. So people are like, oh, who do you think is going to start? I would still start Methods. I think Methods will start this year. I'm pretty confident in that. And I don't know if he's ever going to give it up. But I was like, if you ever were maybe going to see a point where Insight might have an argument, I think it could be if you need more, your team's struggling with S&D. But then I was like, would you not just maybe like put Insight in only for S&D and just have Methods play respawn? So that's sort of how that sort of thing got started in my head. Again, not like a fleshed out opinion. I think there's like some flaws in it, but yeah, I would just be interested to see if a team just like built an S&D specific team and then had another respawn specific team. I agree the volatility and culture would be an issue, but like at some point the culture I think would work itself out. I don't think that's a great argument. I'd be like, okay, that we kind of got to mature past that. But like team chemistry, volatility, all these things are like actual things that can harm your team, and that I understand.
Well, just to kind of wrap up the thoughts on that topic, in CS:GO, there's been 3 teams lately who have done 6-man rosters, and 2 of them have seen a lot of success. So it's Vitality, Navi, and Astralis all decided to add 6-man rosters. And why it works in CS is because one map takes like 45 minutes. Like they're long maps, right? So putting one player in there, taking one player out, it's a long difference you're making. It's like a big map, and also they play a specific role, right? So like on Navi, for example, they bring one of their guys in on one map to play in one spot, like on CT side. Like you sit there, you do this. That's all you're known for. That's what you're good at, right? That's what you're known for, and that's all he does. He plays one map, and then he comes off the rest of the series.
Yeah.
So in COD, right, it's not really going to work because it's just a different map pool. Like you're not always gonna play the same spot every round. It becomes predictable. And I think what I see in COD though is for something to work in S&D, I agree with Yas that like first you have to go through the ego thing and like the culture thing, but also like your player who's not playing is gonna get cold for the next respawn game mode. Yeah. And COD's such a fast game that you have to stay hot. Like CS:GO is different because it's a lot slower, more methodical. You don't have to be as like hot. But with COD, like you have to have your guns ready, you have to have your hands warm. Like we see it time and time again where teams that just played a series that go into a match against someone who hasn't played a series come in and steamroll them just because they're hot. And I can see that being an issue where if a player gets sat out for an S&D, they come back in for the dom or for the control and they're just not feeling it. I can see that being a problem. Yeah. But yeah,
I totally agree. Maybe you just do it for again the map 5, but then it's the additional pressure on the map 5. You want to come in cold on the map 5, like that's risky, right? So I totally agree. I just want to have the conversation. I don't think there's
it might happen in the future. And if I want to see it employed, I'd rather it be a map thing where you tell, let's say you're Toronto, right? You tell Onyx, all right, this map we suck at it for S&D.
Yeah.
Figure it out.
Just
either tell us what we need to do strat wise, or eventually, right, come in and play the map yourself. Do whatever you want to do. But like, they should definitely focus more on like figuring out like New York last year, right? They had like 2 maps in their map pool for S&D, and that was it the entire year.
Yeah.
They never widened it. Like you have to start widening your map pool, and having an academy team to help you do that is, I think, a good thing.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
So this is my
also interestingly that your analogy of CS:GO reminded me of that Rick and Morty scene where the guy like tells a robot to bring the butter over, and he's like, "Is that all I do?" He's like, "That's all you do." That's exactly what reminded me of.
This is my purpose. This is your purpose. Shit. Yeah. No. Yeah. It's interesting. I would like to maybe see it one day, but I definitely could see the drawbacks and why it wouldn't be implemented. But like I guess this is the final point with the academy roster, because again, I'm very intrigued and I'm very excited to see them play. I watched they had a little variant tournament. It was like $2,000, I think, or $1K. I forget what it was. I don't think it was any crazy serious teams were really in there, but they won the whole thing and they looked good while doing it. So it got me a little excited. I think Insight fits that really well, where he can keep up with their S&D strategies while also in game, IGLing and sort of helping them along with the respawn. What do you think the ceiling for a team like this is? I don't think anyone's expecting them to compete with Westar next cup. But is this a team that you could see maybe potentially somewhere down the line, as the season progresses, maybe start to consistently become in that top 4 conversation, especially since, the Subletters Academy team maybe is taking a step back since Diamond COD has recently left, right? There's a position open in that top 4. Or do you think this is a team that's going to maybe hover around that top 6, top 8 for the rest of the year?
I think top 4 is not out of the question with this roster. I don't know if they'll achieve that right away. But I definitely think down the line they can definitely compete at the top, and if they reach their potential, even compete against Western. I think the interesting thing with the NA scene itself right now is that they didn't seem like there was a clear cut number 2, number 3, number 4 after Western. I mean, you could have argued the academy team for New York, but as we've seen, they just lost Diamond Con. Glow Frosty's replacing him, and while they've looked decent, it's not exactly a 1-for-1 like trade in that sense. They're not going to be just as good. So I think in NA, it's that sort of 2nd, 4th, 5th, 6th, all the way through the 8th. I think that's really up for grabs. And I think that is a good thing for a team like Toronto's academy team that allows themselves to build themselves up. And the only real opponent that I think I'd be looking out for is Western in that case.
Yeah.
I mean, NA is incredibly competitive. Like, we know that. There's going to be like 32 teams for the Elite Series. It could be even more. Like, it's insane how talented the NA scene is.
Yeah.
So for the Toronto Academy team, I'd be happy with top 8s. I honestly, they can break top 4s and compete with Western in the future. I definitely think so. But if you're placing top 8, I think if you're any team outside of Western, if you place top 8, you're taking that. That's a good tournament. Because you're playing tough teams by the 4th round. Like, you're already facing tough teams. Yeah. Like, I know Zed's team hasn't made it out of top 64 at all. It's just tough.
Yeah.
Super competitive.
Yeah, I mean, that was Doug was dropped, right? Because they got bounced top 32. He lost to Westar. It's like, that's not really a top 32 position, right? If everybody after also loses to Westar, you're all in the same boat.
I think Seth brings a good point there, because with how deep NA is, it may not necessarily be as top heavy as you could have said in past season. I think with how deep it is, though, you'll see teams get out really early. So I think Seth's right. Placing top 8 consistently, I think, is a pretty good floor for them in any way. Anyways, like, for example, Sib's team, UTC Crew, went from 2nd place in the second cup to losing in the losing out, I think, top 6. They didn't even make top 16 in the 4th cup. They didn't even make top 8. And for a team like that, they just split up. They're going through Rostermania off 1 cup. They played, they were 2nd place, and now after 1 cup, because of how poorly they placed, they're splitting up. So I think being able to place top 8.
I like that.
There's other reasons why.
There's a lot of infighting on that roster. But
I like that roster, and their new roster is good too, right? They picked up Cells and Hollow, right?
Yeah, that team will be interesting to watch. And I think the most interesting thing is how that team will play in the Elite Series, because although there's very limited information about that, thank you, CDL. They're with how pro points will work for seedings, only the top 32 seeds get to be a part of the qualifying series for the Elite Series. So because Cells and Hollow have been placing consistently outside that top 8, I wonder if their seed's going to really hurt them when it comes to qualifying for that. Yeah. Even though they are very talented.
Yeah, that's one of those teams where they're so talented. I wonder, even if they have a poor seeding, that they could upset. I could see that team. They could potentially upsetting Westar itself, right? I wouldn't predict it. Yeah. But I like Jimbo. I mean, Jimbo's Canadian, right? Some of the bias there, but and Hollow was really impressive in the CDL last year, right? Not in the amateur scene, in the actual CDL itself. So. And Cells is good too. I think that team could figure it out, as long as, again, they sort of have that mental game on point and they figure the chemistry. That'll be a good team. So I mean, I was gonna say let's move on.
Yeah, let's move on. Let's focus a little bit for our last topic on Kickoff Classic. I want to start once again with Ultra, because we all are an Ultra podcast. Ultra versus Rocker. Give me your general thoughts. Who's gonna win? Your honest opinion. Who's gonna win?
Who's gonna win?
Ultra. And just in general, Ultra's roster. How do you think it is?
I think I'll go first. With Ultra's roster, obviously we talked about this way back when, even during the off season, about how we were hoping that the Ultra would make a move and we didn't want them to stay complacent. But it looks like this is going to be the main roster. With regards to the kickoff series itself, I think it will be close. My concern for the Ultra would be their time scrimming on the game, because there was a period of time where a lot of the players were out in UK, and I don't know how long ago it was that they all came back to Toronto to be able to scrim.
Early January, I think.
January.
So the tweets,
Okay, so they've had a decent amount of time to scrim, but teams like Minnesota, I know, have been scrimming since the start, and they look they don't look like world beaters necessarily, but they're a very strong team. I'd expect it to be 3-2 in Minnesota's favor, in my honest opinion, although I definitely want the Ultra to win. But I think that lack of time on the game or in comparison to Minnesota, that is, may hurt them. With regards to the roster, I think it's going to be very interesting to see how Cammy and Kleenex progress through the season, because I think we saw them really hit their stride at the end of the last season. You had players like Crim6 noting how Cammy looked like one of the best players with the M4 in his hands, and I think if they continue to improve on that, that'll be what Toronto relies on to get them through the series. I'm very curious to see how guys like Zinni will do, because I feel like he has arguably the most pressure on him with a guy like Insight that is weighing or sitting in the sub spot, where if he is not performing from the start and Toronto looks very bad, it is very possible that Marky B makes the decision to put Insight in over Zinni. And I think for him, he's going to need to show that he's going to be able to compete with these other ARs to keep his spot in the lineup. But that's just my overall view on what they look like.
Yeah, you can go, Seth.
No, I was just saying. So from an S&D standpoint, I think the favors of Rocker. So I kind of agree with Yas with the 3-2 prediction. I think that just like very early in the game, you got Major Maniac, Attach, and Priesta. So just those three guys scream S&D talent, especially early in the season. So I could see them taking the S&Ds. And then in terms of like the actual head-to-head matchup, though, I am excited because you have pretty AR-heavy teams. You got Zinni, and if Cammy flexes on the AR, you have those two. And then the other side of things, you got like Lamar, who's been in AR forever, right? And then you got like Major Maniac, who probably could flex as well. Either way, you have pretty good AR players, and both have pretty good SMG play. It's a nice head-to-head matchup to go with right away. And the rivalry kind of came out of nowhere last year when Minnesota claimed the North, even though
Gary
Toronto
Vaynerchuk, yep.
yeah, just claims it. So I kind of like how that happened. It's almost like, I know it's not any beef between the players, but it is kind of fun to have a better rivalry. So
yeah,
it'll be a fun match either way.
I think it's based on I think actually geographically they are more north than Toronto, more north? Right? Yeah, that's why. But also We the North has been one of the most successful brand activations in the NBA. Also that's I want to tell Gary, he thinks Minnesota's the North, right? Because geographically it's more north than Toronto. But I'm what you don't understand is when you play for Toronto, you don't just play for Toronto, you play for Canada, right? And nobody's gonna say Minnesota's more north than fucking Nunavut. So it's like Yukon, right? I think we got that covered. So I think we're okay. But
the thing about Toronto too is that we all know that Kleenex and Kenny really popped off towards the end of the season, but we don't have a lot of data points, right? We don't have a lot of data points of how they did. It's a completely new game. Pre-set Major Maniac, they have a little bit more time and data points behind them. So I'd even say, as an Ultra fan, that I feel like I'm favoring Rocker right now as well.
All right, so I'll be the lone wolf then. I'll go Ultra, but I want to touch on your point about Metis, because I agree that he definitely does have some pressure. I think it's no coincidence that Toronto went out there and got one substitute immediately, and that one substitute just happened to be an AR, right? You don't got to be, I don't know, CDL Intel to figure out that there's a reason why that kind of happened. But with that being said, I actually like Methods. I think Methods is pretty good, and I think the ball's in his court. You said it best. If Methods is playing well, he's gonna keep his spot. I don't see he's gonna start in my opinion. I think he's good enough to keep his spot. I don't see Insight coming in anytime soon. Personally, is it possible? Sure. But I like Methods, and I think that there was moments throughout last year that he maybe left you scratching your head a little bit. For the most part, he was really consistent. I thought he was really good last year. So I know people like to meme on him from some clips from Black Ops 4 and stuff like that.
Yeah, he's found unfortunate ends of 1v1.
Yeah, I agree. But again, that's also S&D. His respawns I think is really good. And in Modern Warfare, he kind of clutched up at points. So I like Methods. I think Methods is in for a good year, and the ball's in his court. If he's playing well, I don't think you're going to see a swap. I mean, if anything, if he's playing well and the team's struggling, you might actually see one of the academy players potentially get called up in that instance. But you're right. If this team comes off struggling and he's not performing, then I could see that potentially being an option. Cammy's another one who I've been a big fan of Cammy, and I think he's one of the most improved players of last year, just in the entire league, not just on Ultra, but really caught me off guard, really impressed me. And I did agree with the position of building around Kleenex and Cammy. But I gotta admit that there's still some level of question marks
No, there is.
With a player like him, right? How is he going to perform in this game? It's online now, but if they start doing these tournaments and potentially switches to LAN, are we going to see that same level of success transition over? These are sort of question marks that I kind of have. So I'm a little worried in that regard, but overall, I'm pretty confident in the roster, and I actually think they can beat Minnesota. Just because, again, I think Cammy and Kleenex, you get them going, they can really compete with the best, but it's going to be close. I agree. I like Minnesota too. They got a pretty good team.
No, I don't think it's out of the question that Ultra could definitely take that series, and I think you bring up great concerns with regards to Cammy and Kleenex if they can indeed perform how they did last year. Because again, it is in a 4v4 setting. They have more expectation on them now than they did last year. Yeah. I feel like so that'll be interesting. With regards to Methods, I think you're 100% right. He looked very consistent last year, and I think the only knock on him as a player in general is that unlike other ARs in the league, he doesn't necessarily have the same ability to communicate as an in-game leader, which is why like a guy like Insight who does have that ability is brought in case that's something that causes them pains. But Methods, I think he's seen. People doubting him throughout this year, especially at the beginning. I mean, even just that, I know it was a joke, but that video that Optic made giving him the C tier, stuff like that lights a fire under him. And like, I know he sees himself as the face of this organization in many ways. So I think he'll be looking to step up. And I really hope that Seth's and I prediction about this team early on, they prove us wrong, because I think they certainly have the potential to do so.
Well, we give them a pretty harsh ranking, and we did that because of the roster move. So like when we ranked them, I even said like we're giving them meh because I'm meh about the roster, right? But it doesn't mean that like they're not going to exceed the expectations and play well. I do think this is a good team. To touch on your point about Cammy though, it's a good point to make because we haven't seen him like on a 4v4 COD play like probably super well, and same thing with Kleenex as well. So it's a fair concern. The one thing I'll say that it does favor Zinni, that kind of thinking, because his best title, in my opinion, it was in World War II.
Yeah.
And when he won an MVP, like he was insane at that game. It was a 4v4. It was a slower paced game, and I think this game does feel a little bit faster than World War II for sure. But it does favor slower ARs compared to faster ARs. From what I've seen so far,
more methodical early on, playing, right? Modern Warfare was more like go, and I feel like this was a more methodical, cerebral sort of title.
Yeah, and that's the one thing about having Bance as well, is like having it be more methodical, and having a guy like Bance on the team could really help. And so I'm excited. I think that like Minnesota's just a really tough opponent to play first, because out of all the teams in the CDL, I kind of feel like Minnesota's S&D is going to be up there at the start of the year.
Yeah.
Just because I have no Major Mania, I can watch his S&D forever, and he always seems to have a really good grasp on it. So if you want to pick a team to be good in such early, I think it's Minnesota. That's where I lean towards them.
But I also think it's arguably their best matchup, and not in terms of like easiest matchup, but in terms of I think they're like one of the most evenly matched teams. Like we haven't done our power rankings yet, but we will do that next weekend. But I have them both in sort of that same like dark horse category, where I don't expect them to be that like elite tier that's like always pushing top fours, like your Dallases, your FaZe, your Optics, right? Your LA Thieves. I think a lot of people would sort of put those in a little bit of an echelon above, but I do put them in that like, if throughout the year do I see Toronto making runs to top fours? Absolutely. Will it happen every tournament? Maybe not, but I think they're in that like Minnesota, Toronto, maybe Florida, right? Like teams like that. So I'm intrigued. I like the rosters. I would have loved to have seen Afro be picked up, and I think that would have made me feel a little bit better, but they went for a different direction with the Academy team, and who knows, maybe you do see Onyx or Insight at some point. But yeah, I agree. I'm excited for this team. Methods, I think, is going to have a fire line under his ass, and I'm excited to see what Kleenex and Cammy can do. New title, new game, 4v4. Let's get into it.
Yeah, and you know what? Last thing I wanted to touch on, just because you guys are in relation to this, just because you guys are more generalists than us. And I know this was a fan event. What is your guys' most like anticipated matchup? What do you guys?
I think initially it was going to be Dallas in New York, because
Clay.
I was really curious to see how Clay would play against his former teammates. And I was really hoping that it'd be Hydra being able to come over, because I was curious to see how he'd play against Dallas. I know, even though in many ways it's a preseason matchup, Clay's the kind of guy that would take this like to 100 and take it super seriously. He wants those bragging rights. That obviously Optic Chicago versus the LA Thieves is a big one. People always like to see how those two teams will stack up, especially with how everything went last year when it was like a round 11 Game 5 that they ended up losing the Thieves that did in that case. But as a fan, those are the two ones that I was really curious to watch.
I think Optic and LA is probably that's gonna be one of the best matchups on paper. Who do you guys sort of have in that? I think Optic's gonna take it. I think a lot of people would sort of be in that position.
Agree.
But again, LA's got that. You never know.
I actually disagree. I think LA
really.
Won that. Yeah. I have a feeling like I haven't watched a ton of scrims. I'll be honest, I haven't. But I have a feeling like this game. It seems like a TJ kind of game for me. Like it seems like a TJ kind of. I don't know why. I just feel like he'll be good at this game. S&D as well. So I actually think he might come out really hot in this title, but I could be wrong. I haven't seen a lot of scrims.
Yeah, I've been watching Chicago's scrims because they're one of the few teams that scrims pretty much all of their streams all of their scrims, and lately they've been looking very, very strong. I mean, they'll joke around from time to time, but I think any doubts that I had about having Dashy as their new fourth have subsided. Because they look damn nasty in respawn. S&D will obviously be a question, but the guys like Dashy and Envoy and Formal all have good
S&D. Yeah, I think there would be. I like.
The thing is, like in years past, people would knock Optic Chicago or like Optic in general on their S&D because their respawn was so good, so they needed something to point to.
Yeah,
I don't think you can point to that anymore.
No, I agree. I like this team. I think they're going to be good S&D. They're well rounded, and when they're locked in, I think this could be a team where maybe they start off hot, and then the players get a little bit more comfortable and they coast a little bit, and then at the end they really lock in. But this is a team that I think is going to be top 3, top 2. All year long. Some of the interesting matchups for me is I think Dallas will take it. I think Seattle Surge versus LAG could be interesting, although I do think Seattle Surge will take that one. Atlanta should beat Florida in my opinion, but London and Paris, the Battle of EU, Scraps versus his formal team. This is another one that I was interested in. Personally, I want to see Weskins and Scraps on Paris just for the content. Aqua's a good AR though, so they got a good player regardless, but I just wanted to see the content. Obviously, I was a big fan of Fire. We've talked about him on the show multiple times. Am I crazy for leaning towards Paris in this matchup?
I think they're the favorites in my opinion.
Are they the favorites?
Yeah, I agree.
I think the consensus, or at least from people that have seen scrims, is that Paris has looked surprisingly good. Not necessarily top 3 or top 4 or anything like that, but like they're a sneaky good team. And I think if I was to gun to my head, I'm definitely picking Paris 100%.
Okay.
I'd favor them in this series
because I knew
I have a little bit of a bad hot take, but I actually think Classic's gonna be really good at this game. I've seen a bit of him play so far, and he looks really, really good at this game. And I know it sucks because Toronto just cut him, but
I think Classic's good.
But I think Classic looks really, really good at this title, and I think that putting Fire said we interviewed him before a while ago on the podcast. He even said like he wants to team with veterans, like he wants to learn from them. Yeah. That's like the number one takeaway that I have from him is like he wants to learn from guys that know the game well. And Aqua, great at the game. Like Classic, he's been around forever. So like to surround him with guys like that, I think this team has a lot of potential. And the nerd in me is like so excited for that matchup just because I want to see how like Dylan and Alex do it back together again. It's gonna be a fun one. That to me is my favorite game to watch just because of like all the question marks around it. But
yeah, because I had thought that it was such a meme for so long that people would just be like Paris bottom, Paris bottom, Paris bottom.
Yeah.
But yeah, I agree that they were. I like Fire a lot. I think Scrap's a good player. Aqua again, tough year from last year, but still good AR. And Classic people, yeah, man. Like, listen, he was. A lot of people gave Kleenex a lot of credit for kind of helping turn this team around because obviously he came in and that's when they started winning all those matches. But dude, Classic played his role.
He heated up
for sure, right? Like he showed up at key points throughout those games, and he's a good player. And I do think that maybe keeping Bance might have been the right fit for that team, if that makes sense. Not saying Bance was a better player, but just a fit. But Classic's good. I'm happy to see him back in the league. But yeah, Chris, give us your thoughts.
You know what? You guys pretty much gave every reason for every game possible, so I'm gonna overlap if I say anything.
No, just go for it. You want to chime in there? You looked at me when I started talking.
I'm vanilla. I'm a vanilla guy, so I'm gonna go probably with the game versus with New York. I just want to see it. I love those two teams, and I'm excited. Like those two teams have been the top, and to me some of the top pedigree as well, and you always like to see the top people going against each other, and there's a storyline to it as well. So it's easy, apart from Toronto, which I'm obviously most excited about. It's that.
Oh.
Yeah, I think it'll be interesting to see Diamond Con in his first action, assuming he and ASIM play, because I feel like that makes things very weird
also
for
Illy,
them.
Also, Illy back in a 4v4 COD S&D. Ooh,
Yeah.
let's get it, man. Illy in a 4v4 S&D. That's gonna be fun to watch.
Dude, Dallas is gonna be so good this year, man. Dallas and
they look like the
Atlanta and
best team,
Chicago. Damn.
No.
I like Illy, man. Illy's Canadian too, man.
Yeah, I know.
Get him on Toronto,
You gotta
bro. What the hell?
Canadian boys, right?
I know.
There's not a lot of us.
Yeah.
Yeah, I wish.
Exactly. Well,
Yeah.
hey guys, I think that's everything we wanted covered today. You know, unless Spencer or you guys have anything else you want to talk to, really appreciate your time today. This was a lot of fun, and I know we came on yours, but I hope this is a reoccurring thing in the future too.
Yeah.
100%. Thanks for having us on. I mean, Seth and I, we love to do this, talking about it all the time. So we appreciate you guys. We did do this for hours.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Trust me, I can ramble, man. You guys can tell. That's a bit of an issue. I'm working on it. But yeah, thanks so much for coming. Just tell people where they can find you. Again, we'll put it in the description, but let them know.
Yeah, we have our Twitter, Hipfire P, on Twitter. You're often tweeting out clips from the Challenger scene. And you can catch us on YouTube as well, Hipfire Podcast. We try to do weekly content right now on the Challenger scene, but as the CDL ramps up, we'll be doing that as well.
Awesome. And thank you guys for watching. Again, if you enjoyed it, like, comment, subscribe, do all that fun stuff. And